In 2016, a man who was equal parts survivalist and seeker, a man who traded a six-figure tech career for a life in the wilderness, a man who was phenomenal at surviving in nature, disappeared in it forever. This is the story of that man, but this is also the story of the Parvati Valley, a sliver of the Indian Himalayas so staggeringly beautiful and so consistently deadly that the list of people who have walked it and never walked out reads less like a police register and more like a haunting. And it's the story of a phenomena called India syndrome, a kind of spiritual psychosis that's been quietly consuming Western travelers in India for decades, blurring the lines between enlightenment and madness, between choosing to disappear and being disappeared. This is the story of Justin Alexander Shetler. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is haunting.
The India syndrome.
Strikes back.
Le syndrome
There
is
we go.
back. It was first covered in our Jonathan Spolin episode, one of
Many
my
years
favorite
ago.
cases. And in the process of making that, we got to interact with Professor Eho, who coined this term. He used to be in the consulate in Mumbai, and
That's
he
right.
came across many such cases. I remember Jonathan Spolin, but Alexander Shelter is not a name I've heard before.
Right. It's a more recent case. One that did receive a lot of limelight for how intensive and vigorous the search was. Also really eerie case, but I don't think it made quite the impact that Spolin's case
Got
did.
it.
And I don't know why that is, but we'll get into the story, we'll get into India syndrome, we'll get into all of it.
Before we get into all of this, I mean, guys, please subscribe. Please just hit the subscribe button. We get so many views, but only 70%. Actually, 70% of the people watching are not subscribed. That's what the data tells. I mean,
It's really
YouTube
shameful
data,
behavior.
Yeah, I mean, guys, come on. All this, you don't want to
Chop,
disappear,
chop.
do you? So go hit the subscribe button, and if you love us, and if you have some extra pocket money or extra change, we'd love if you become YouTube members or patrons. That is really what keeps the engine running when we don't have brand deals, because we're a true crime podcast. Sometimes that happens. But the Patreon and the YouTube members, big shout out to all of you, because
Love
you
you
really,
all.
truly support the podcast.
But we love you even just for subscribing.
We do. And if you're not subscribed, I mean,
subscribe.
do we love you? I gotta really think about that. I'm not sure.
No, we don't.
I love you guys. Okay, now on with the case for today.
On the 20th of August 2016, a 35-year-old American man sat cross-legged in a Himalayan cave, writing what would become his final message to the world. He had no bed, no electricity, no running water, just a fire pit, a few candles, and a walking stick he'd carved into a flute. His name was Justin Alexander Shetler, though he had long dropped the surname. To his 30,000 Instagram followers and the readers of his travel blog, he was simply Justin Alexander, a nomad, an adventurer, and in his own words, a ninja of sorts. And the message he posted that day from a remote mountaintop where cell service flickered in and out was both a travel update and unknowingly a farewell. He wrote about a holy man he had met in the mountains, a sadhu, one of those wandering Hindu ascetics who renounce material life in pursuit of spiritual liberation. This particular sadhu, Justin explained to his followers, had been practicing extreme yoga for years and had even mutilated his own body as an act of renunciation. Justin was fascinated. The sadhu had invited him on a pilgrimage, a 3-day trek to a sacred glacial lake at 13,000 feet called Mantalai, where the Hindu god Shiva was said to have meditated for 3,000 years. They would also carry almost nothing, some rice, flour, sugar, tea. 10 days of meditation among the rocks, in a place so remote there was no vegetation, no wood to burn, no other human beings. And then Justin wrote the line that would haunt everyone who loved him for years to come. I should return mid-September or so. If I'm not back by then, don't look for me.
Oh, usually these messages do not
Say that.
forebode the mysterious end that may follow, but this
Right.
has it encoded. It's almost like he has accepted something wacky might happen.
Now, here's the thing. This message ended with a winky face emoji.
Ah.
So a lot of people have tried to read into that to say that was this meant to be like just a quip, a joke, not a foreboding, but to others it's still eerie enough where it asks a question.
Do we
of-
know if the other blogs that he's written, and if in any of those he has talked about wanting to go down a spiritual path of
Absolutely.
isolation?
That's why he was there. He wanted a different life. Nothing that abjectly said that I want to cut off from everything and be so far and never speak to anyone again. That's not what anything said. But of course, there were all the tangents that we see of someone wanting to meditate more, someone wanting to live alone, someone wanting to renounce all their material possessions. So it's an interesting question to ask. Does someone like that really want to go away forever and just never return?
I mean, if a sadhu offered me a trip like this, I would have said yes.
Would you have left a message like that?
No.
Is that a
no,
joke?
No,
Like,
no.
I don't
I
know.
would have texted you, Ash, I'm going to be back by this day. But this is creepy.
Yeah. So he punctuated this message with a winking emoji, as though it were a joke. Maybe it was. Justin had always been playful, always walking the line between sincerity and bravado. But mid-September came and went. And then October. And then Justin's mother, Susie Reeb, sitting in her home in Portland, Oregon, realized her son had not called. His Instagram had gone silent. His blog had gone dark. The last known photograph ever taken of him showed a gaunt, depleted man who hadn't eaten in 2 days, stumbling down a mountain trail in one of the most dangerous valleys on earth. A place that had swallowed dozens of travelers before him. A place locals had nicknamed the Valley of Death. But before we discuss the day Justin vanished and the questions he left behind, we first need to understand the man we're talking about. And for that, we have to go back to the year 1981, the day Justin was born in Sarasota, Florida. But shortly after he was born, his parents divorced when he was very young, and his upbringing was unconventional from the start. His father drifted into a countercultural life, moving through phases of substance use before finding discipline in Aikido, yoga, and vegetarianism. His mother, Susie Reeb, was warm and encouraging, the kind of parent who didn't push her son towards a conventional path, but instead told him to find his own. Justin moved several times during his childhood, living with his mother, developing a deep love for the outdoors that went beyond casual hiking. When Justin was 16, Susie made a decision that would shape the entire trajectory of Justin's life. She pulled him out of high school and enrolled him in the Wilderness Awareness School, a nature-based educational program near Seattle, Washington. The school was co-founded by a man named John Young, himself a protege of the legendary tracker Tom Brown Jr., who had founded the internationally acclaimed Tracker School in New Jersey. And there Justin thrived. He wasn't just learning to identify plants and track animals, he was learning a philosophy of deep attention to the natural world, of sitting in one place for hours and noticing the most minute changes in his environment. Young recognized Justin's talent and eventually brought the teenager to the Tracker School in New Jersey, where he befriended a 22-year-old instructor named Tom McElroy. McElroy would later recall Justin as fearless, the kind of person who would throw himself off a cliff and grab branches on the way down to his fall, a man who even as a teenager seemed allergic to playing it safe. Soon after, Justin got his GED, which is the General Educational Development Test, and then moved through a series of lives that would make most people's resumes look timid. He worked as a wilderness EMT and a massage therapist. He became the frontman of a punk rock band. And then, pivoting entirely, he entered the world of tech entrepreneurship, working for startups and eventually building enough of a career that by his early 30s, he had accumulated a comfortable passive income. By then, he was living in San Francisco, well-dressed, well-connected, attending events where people introduced him in glowing terms. By all outward measures, Justin Alexander Shetler had arrived. But Justin felt something was missing. He was restless in a way that a good salary couldn't fix. In his writing, he described himself as someone running away from a life that wasn't authentic, running from monotony and towards wonder. And so, at the age of 32, he quit everything. He sold or gave away most of his possessions, drained his savings into causes he believed in, including earthquake relief work in Nepal, bought a one-way ticket, and began traveling the world. He documented everything on his blog, Adventures of Justin, and on his Instagram, building a following of tens of thousands of people who watched him motorcycle through Southeast Asia, meditate in remote temples, and live among indigenous communities. His tagline was simple and perfectly him: be kind and do epic shit.
Ash, this is reminiscent of this movie that I have watched multiple times only until the halfway point because I know what happens at the end and I don't know, I haven't been able to get myself to it. It's this movie called Into the Wild. It's based on a book by the same name and it's about this guy that, again, similar story.
And a true story.
True. I didn't know it was a true story.
Yeah, Chris McCandless is the American.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
And it was an ill-fated journey into the Alaskan wilderness, a very tragic story.
Yeah, so
and I had just heard
that's
about
a spoiler
the book.
for the film if you guys haven't seen it. But yeah, I was given a similar spoiler before I watched the film, and so I've never been able to get to the end because I'm like, this guy, this protagonist that I'm falling in love with, apparently he dies at the end.
You know where this is going, yeah.
And so yeah, it reminds me of that book.
And what's interesting and crazy is that Justin Alexander Shetler was actually a fan of the book himself.
No way.
Yeah. So those comparisons are uncanny. People have made them. It's a very obvious comparison to make. In fact, not only was Justin a fan of the book, he even added the word Supertramp to his name at one point, mirroring McCandless' chosen alias of Alexander Supertramp. But Justin was not Chris McCandless. McCandless was an idealistic amateur who walked into the wilderness with limited survival knowledge and died because of it. Justin was a trained expert, one of the most skilled outdoorsmen in any room he entered. He knew bird language, the art of reading the alarm calls and flight patterns of birds to understand the movement of predators. He could start a fire from almost anything. He had spent weeks living alone in the wild before and emerged healthier than when he left. If anyone could survive the remotest corners of the world, it was Justin Alexander Shetler, which is exactly what makes his disappearance in India so difficult to accept. But before we follow Justin into the mountains, you need to understand the place he was walking into. The Parvati Valley sits in the western Himalayas in the small northern Indian state of Himachal Pradesh. It is by every measure one of the most visually stunning places on the planet. Towering snow-capped peaks, dense pine forests, glacial rivers the color of jade, and ancient villages clinging to cliffsides as though placed there by a painter. The valley takes its name from the Hindu goddess Parvati, and it radiates with spiritual significance. At its upper reaches lies Khirganga, where Lord Shiva is said to have meditated for 3,000 years. Beyond that, the trail climbs towards Mantalai Lake, the sacred glacial source of the Parvati River itself. Since the 1960s and 70s, when the counterculture movement sent waves of Western hippies eastwards in search of enlightenment, the Parvati Valley has been a magnet for seekers. Backpackers, yogis, spiritual tourists, and wandering sadhus have made the valley a kind of open-air ashram, a place where the line between the physical and the spiritual feels thin. Trance music festivals dot the calendar. Cafes in the town of Kasol serve banana pancakes and chai to dreadlocked travelers from every continent. It's beautiful and inviting and feels on the surface like a paradise. But beneath the surface, the Parvati Valley holds a darkness that's been accumulating for decades. Since the early 1990s, according to both official and unofficial records, at least 24 foreign tourists have died or disappeared in and around the valley. Official police records from the Kullu district show that over 1,000 people went missing in the Parvati Valley between 2003 and 2023 alone, 21 of them foreigners. Only about half were ever traced. The valley has earned nicknames that sound like they belong in a thriller novel. The Valley of Death, the Valley of Shadows, India's backpacker Bermuda Triangle. The pattern is eerily consistent. A spirited young traveler, usually male, usually in their 20s or 30s, arrives seeking adventure or spirituality, sends a final message to loved ones, and then simply vanishes without a trace. In 1991, Australian backpacker Odette Houghton and Swiss traveller Marianne Heer both vanished in the valley and were never found. In 1996, Ian Mogford, a British backpacker, disappeared after reportedly telling his father he had befriended a sadhu. Years after his disappearance, rumours persisted that he was still alive somewhere in India. Investigators even put up posters with his photograph around the valley and in Delhi's backpacker quarter Paharganj. In Delhi, some tore the posters down immediately. When they were replaced, they were torn down again. In 1997, Canadian tourist Ardavan Tahirzadeh vanished. His mother, Homa Bustani, spent years searching for him, wondering if he had simply chosen to step back from the world. In 2000, two German hikers were shot while sleeping in their tents, and one died. That same year, a British man, his Spanish fiancée, and her 14-year-old son were attacked while camping above the valley. The woman and the boy were killed, their bodies thrown into a gorge. Only the man survived. In 2007, Israeli backpacker Dror Sheikh was found bleeding and dying on a trail near Khirganga, a knife stained with blood beside him. In 2015, Polish national Bruno Mashlik, a 24-year-old from Ernst & Young, went missing while trekking solo. His father blamed local drug mafias and continued searching for years, but with no answers even 11 years later. So what is happening in this valley? The theories are as varied as the victims.
Ash, I've heard about this valley before from friends who've been there. One incident that I recall, it was a German foreign national I know, and he reported that he went on a solo hike, and he actually there was a wolf that he came across that he had a very crazy story about it. It almost sounds fake, but I trust the guy. So yeah, but he had to run away from that wolf, and you can imagine the wilderness in this area is one facet of risk that is posed.
Exactly.
The other is, of course, the India syndrome, where you disappear for spiritual purposes.
Right.
And the third is drug mafia. So, when we have these notions of, take the Bermuda Triangle, for example, people, because of the multitude of disappearances, one comes up with many kinds of theories, right? And you get into the more supernatural side of it. But then when you look at it, Bermuda Triangle, perfect. There's so many kinds of it. Whirlpool, weather, storms, blah, blah, blah. And I think given the data set that we have, the sample size we have, I think multitude of reasons could explain these disappearances.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, these cases that you've just talked about, it's kind of mind-numbing.
There are so many.
Yeah, getting shot in the tent, to a stained knife, to just a disappearance that again
With
has a sadhu at the center of it. So yeah, it is creepy for sure, but I just want the listeners to know, a multitude of reasons can be the cause.
100%. Now, just like Aryan, many believe there are multiple different theories. Some blame the mountains themselves. The gorges are deep, the cliffs are sheer, the river is violent, and during monsoon season, landslides can bury entire trails. Others point to the valley's drug trade. The Parvati Valley and the nearby village of Malana are home to some of the most potent cannabis in the world, Malana cream, a legendary strain of hashish that sells for extraordinary prices on the international black market. Illegal plantations are hidden at high altitudes, and the drug economy has created a shadow world of traffickers, of corrupt officials, and opportunistic criminals. Some travelers have been robbed and murdered after buying hash at the source and attempting to leave the valley with it. Others may have stumbled into something they were never supposed to see. Then there is Datura, a plant with a trumpet-shaped purple-white flower that grows wild in the valley. Known locally as devil's snare or thorn apple, it's both a sacred plant associated with Lord Shiva and a terrifyingly powerful hallucinogen. In small doses, it induces vivid hallucinations. In large doses, it causes delirium, psychosis, and amnesia so total that victims have reported losing months of their lives. The Tura seeds are sometimes mixed into hash and smoked in a chillam, and in some reported cases, the Tura has been deliberately fed to tourists by criminals posing as sadhus to rob them. And then there is the darkest theory of all, that a serial killer has been prowling these forested hills for decades, preying on a very specific kind of traveler. The majority of the disappeared fit a profile: young, male, adventurous, often traveling solo, often carrying valuables and cash. Some speculate that the killer is someone dressing up as a sadhu. Others believe it's a foreigner who blends in with the backpacker crowd. According to one long-time foreign resident of the valley, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, an Indian man was arrested and jailed for the murder of a foreign tourist, and it was rumored that he had killed a total of 13 foreigners before he was caught. The police, for their part, prefer explanations that don't involve murder in their jurisdiction. The additional superintendent of police for Kullu district, Nishchint Singh Negi, who dealt with many of these cases, was candid about what he believed drew tourists to their doom. In his view, most came for the hash. The quality was among the best in the world, he said, and people got high, got lost, and fell into the river. The Parvati River, after all, is relentless. If you slip in, your body would be pulverized. No one would ever find you. This was the valley that Justin Alexander Shetler walked into in the summer of 2016. He knew its reputation, he'd done his research, and he went in anyway. Justin had been in India for months before he reached the Parvati Valley, motorcycling through the subcontinent, absorbing everything. By mid-2016, he had made his way to Himachal Pradesh and up into the valley. He gravitated, as travelers often do, towards Khirganga, the spiritual endpoint of the valley's most popular trek, a ramshackle camp of wooden poles, tarpaulin shelters, and aluminum structures nestled in a clearing at 9,500 feet. Hot springs steam in the cold mountain air. Sadhus sit around fire pits smoking chillums filled with local hash. For many visitors, Khirganga is where the trek ends. For Justin, it was where a new chapter began. Rather than sleeping in one of the camp's basic guest houses, Justin found a cave, a 4-foot-tall hollow hidden above the camp on a forested hillside. He moved in. He collected firewood, kept a pit fire going through cold nights, read by candlelight, and lived there for weeks. He was doing what he had trained for his entire life, thriving alone in nature. But Justin wasn't the only one on this spiritual retreat. There was one person who was about to find him. On July 28th, a 47-year-old Russian man named Andrei Gapon, who had been on his own 3-month spiritual retreat in the valley, arrived at Khirganga and met Justin by chance. Gapon was immediately drawn to this tall, broad-shouldered American with an eagle tattoo across his chest, who told him he was living in the mountains. Justin took Gapon to see his cave, and the Russian was impressed. Here was a man who clearly knew what he was doing in the wild. The two became friends over the following weeks, sharing meals, conversations, and quiet evenings around fires. It was during this period that Justin met another man who would become central to the mystery of his disappearance. A self-proclaimed sadhu named Sat Narayan Rawat, also called Naga Baba. The sadhu had a hut near Khirganga and was a known figure in the area, though not necessarily a respected one. A Frenchman named Lee, who lived part-time in the nearby village of Kalga, warned Justin about Rawat. The sadhu had a reputation for petty theft from careless tourists, and Lee described him as rough and crude, someone with an aggressive energy that just felt wrong. Others in the area referred to Rawat not as a real sadhu, but as a business baba, someone who dressed the part and cultivated the mystique, but was really just a man living in the mountains looking for what he could get. But Justin was fascinated. He visited Rawat's hut regularly, sitting around the fire pit, smoking chillam with him, watching the sadhu perform complicated yoga postures. And then Justin posted something on Instagram about Rawat that now reads like a cold hand on the back of your neck. I've heard stories about the magical powers of these babas. They are holy men, but wild, and are even above the law in India. Police won't arrest them, even for murder, which happens, I'm told. He wrote those words and then, days later, set off into the wilderness with this very man. Around August 22nd, Justin departed Khirganga with Rawat and a porter cook named Anil Singh for the 3-day trek to Mantalai Lake, the sacred glacier at 13,000 feet. Before leaving, Justin told Gapon about the plan. Gapon offered to come along, but Justin said this was a journey he wanted to make with the sadhu alone, a spiritual pilgrimage he needed to experience through the holy man's eyes. As they said goodbye, Justin made a joke to Gapon that would later feel like a prophecy. "If I die, write something nice about me on Facebook," he said. And with that, Gapon watched his friend walk up the trail and disappear into the mountains. But on that trek is where the story fractures into conflicting accounts, unanswered questions, and a silence so absolute that it swallowed everything. According to the porter Anil Singh, Rawat told him to walk ahead and that they would catch up. The sadhu and Justin continued together. Now that's the porter's account. Then comes the account of Naga Baba, Rawat himself. And that's where the accounts don't necessarily align. Rawat initially told people that Justin had simply walked ahead of him and that because it had gotten dark, he lost sight of him. Later, when confronted by Justin's friends, Rawat changed his story. He claimed that Justin had left him after they encountered other trekkers near Mantalai Lake and that Justin had headed higher up the valley with them. The last confirmed sighting of Justin Alexander Shetler alive was on September 3, 2016. A group of hikers, people Justin had met previously in the valley, encountered him on the trail between Mantalai Lake and Khirganga. They took what would become the final photograph of him. The picture is devastating to look at in context. In it, Justin is visibly diminished, gaunt, physically depleted, far thinner than the strong, vital man his Instagram followers knew. According to the hikers, he hadn't eaten in 2 days and was severely underweight. The sadhu had passed by the same hikers roughly 30 minutes before Justin, meaning they were traveling in proximity but apparently not together. The hikers invited Justin to join them, but he declined. He said he wanted to get back to his belongings, find internet access, edit his latest video, and rest. Justin turned and continued down the mountain alone. From the spot where he was last seen, it was a 2 to 3 day hike back to Khirganga and then another 10 kilometers, about 3 hours, to where he had parked his motorcycle. He never made it. His motorcycle was found undisturbed where he had left it. Some of his belongings were later discovered scattered along the banks of the Parvati River. His iPhone, the device he used to document his entire life on social media, was never recovered. Neither was Justin. No body, no remains, no trace of what happened to a man who knew how to survive in the wild better than most people alive. For weeks after September 3rd, nobody raised alarm. Justin had told people he might be gone until mid-September, and the remoteness of the area meant silence was expected. But by late September and early October, his mother Susie had heard nothing. She knew her son. She knew he would have called at the first opportunity. Something was wrong. Meanwhile, in the Parvati Valley, Justin's friend Gapon had returned to Russia but was growing uneasy. He reached out to Lee, the Frenchman in Kalga, who decided to investigate. Lee hiked 3 hours to Khirganga to find Rawat, the sadhu, the last known person to have been with Justin. What Lee found there alarmed him. Rawat was sitting calmly in his hut, as though nothing had happened. When Lee and several others confronted him about Justin's whereabouts, the sadhu became angry and dismissive, claiming he knew nothing. Justin is crazy, he said, when confronted about Justin's disappearance. But Lee didn't believe a word. He filed a police report at the small station near Khirganga, and the official missing persons report was filed on October 3rd, a full month after Justin was last seen. Susie Reeb boarded a plane to New Delhi on October 9th and connected with Jonathan Skeels, a friend of Justin's based in London, who flew out to meet her. Together, they met with officials at the US Embassy in Delhi before traveling north into Himachal Pradesh. Back in the valley, Lee organized ground searches with local trekking guides while the police launched their own operation. Susie even hired a private helicopter, and the Himachal Pradesh government provided a state helicopter for aerial searches over the valley. India's External Affairs Minister, Sushma Swaraj, reportedly took note of the case, seeking updates from the Chief Minister of Himachal Pradesh. The police had never used a helicopter to search for a missing foreigner in the valley before. And then, on October 15th, 2 days after Susie filed her official complaint at the district police office in Kullu, in a mind-blowing development, the police apprehended Sat Narayan Rawat on suspicion of abduction and murder.
Wow.
Crazy.
I have chills right now because, in this story, there are so many more people and links to the disappearance as opposed to the Jonathan Spolin case.
Correct, where it was just silence.
It was silence, right? And the silence can be read into and hypothesized. But there are people,
Correct.
witnesses, as well as prime suspects that are here.
Yeah.
And
behavior that is fishy and accounts that are conflicting. There's just a lot of information here that makes you go, this may not be one of those cases where someone has just fallen into the valley. So Sat Narayan Rawat was arrested. He was brought before Susie and Skeels and questioned by the police. According to the Superintendent of Police, Padam Chand, Rawat admitted that Justin had undertaken the trek with him and the porter, but claimed that Justin had walked ahead and he simply lost sight of him. The porter Anil Singh told a story that largely aligned with the sadhu's revised version. But that didn't end the police's suspicions. And so Rawat was held in a police lockup at the Manikaran police post. His remand set to expire on October 24th. But here's what's insane. Rawat would never see that date. A few days after his arrest, Sat Narayan Rawat was found dead in his cell. He hanged himself from the cell grill using the drawstring from his dhoti, the same traditional garment he had been allowed to continue wearing in custody. The prime suspect was dead. The case was in the dark, and Justin was still missing.
I have goosebumps. What?
Yeah. Yeah, this to me is so mind-blowing because this is a man who was just about to leave prison. There wasn't enough evidence to keep him there. He knew his date of being able to leave was coming up. It was just a few days away, and he's found dead. This is not a man who's so scared to be in prison knowing he's never going to be able to leave. That's not what's happening here. And still he's dead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to think.
Yeah, me neither.
Because this is a sadhu. You can call him a business baba, but clearly he is somebody who has transcendental qualities, right? I mean, if he's doing the yoga poses, lives alone, there is something quirky about the fella.
Yeah,
Whether
yeah.
or not he is a...
He might be a con artist in some senses,
but he still has... And yeah, I mean, is this psychosis? Is this guilt? Is
this a police conspiracy? I don't know.
Is this a police conspiracy? Because, custodial deaths are not
Are
something...
common.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
The sadhu's death in custody became the second mystery layered on top of the first. Some viewed his death as an unspoken admission of guilt, a man who knew what he had done and couldn't face what was coming. Others found the circumstances suspicious, noting how convenient it was that the one person who might know what happened to Justin was now permanently silenced in a valley where the police had a long track record of avoiding attention to the disappearances of foreigners. Justin's friends, Tom McElroy and Jonathan Skeels, found it strange that the sadhu had died just days before his remand was set to expire, in a jurisdiction that had every incentive to make the case go away quietly. Susie Reeb was devastated. In her words, they had lost the last thread of hope of finding Justin and understanding what truly happened. And with that, the police effectively closed the case. Their final report was a single haunting line of institutional helplessness. We cannot conclude the possible reason of death, but we presume that he might have been abducted by someone with the intention to kill him. And with that, Justin Alexander Shetler became one more name on the list, one more ghost of the Parvati Valley. And with that death, the police that investigated Justin's disappearance included Justin's final blog post, the one that ended with "Don't look for me," in their official report as context. Their interpretation was that Justin might have been yet another foreign backpacker with a case of what is called India syndrome, someone who had simply chosen to drop off the grid. Initially, Additional Superintendent Nishchit Singh Negi had suspected drugs and an accidental fall into the river. But after learning about Justin's time with the sadhu, his cave dwelling, and the flute staff he carved, the police seemed to settle on a different narrative. That Justin was a man who maybe wanted to disappear, and the valley had simply obliged. Now, we've discussed India syndrome on this podcast, like Aryan said, many years ago, but we'll revisit it today again for our new listeners. The India syndrome is a concept that sounds almost literary, but has roots in real clinical observation. It was coined in 1985, like Aryan said, by the French psychiatrist Regis Aero, who worked as the staff psychiatrist at the French consulate in Mumbai, who, over a period of 16 months, treated approximately 200 French nationals in India. Of those, 50 presented with psychosis. Of those 50, 15 had what Aero described as a form of travel-related psychosis specific to India, a condition he called voyage pathogène, or in plain terms, India syndrome. Aero described a pattern. Healthy, well-adjusted young Westerners in their 20s and 30s would arrive in India excited and stable, and within weeks would become disoriented, confused, and in some cases fully psychotic. Some experienced mystical delusions, some burned their passports, some wandered the country in a dissociative haze for months while their families lost track of them entirely. In Arrow's analysis, the condition was triggered by the collision between idealized Western perceptions of India as a pure spiritual land and the overwhelming, often disorienting reality of actually being there. The crowds, the sensory overload, and above all, the gravitational pull of spiritual practices that can destabilize an unprepared mind. India is not the only place that produces this effect. Jerusalem syndrome described a similar phenomena among visitors in the Holy City who arrive and become convinced they are biblical prophets. Around while I was talking to my mom about this case, I'm discussing India syndrome with her. I'm telling her that it's similar to Jerusalem syndrome. And me, my family, we've lived in Israel when I was much younger. My father was posted there as part of a UN mission. And my mom goes, "Oh my God, Jerusalem does something to you. Your dad and I, we were just walking through the city. And for no reason at all, by the end of it, we were sobbing in tears." And I was really young. I was 7 or 8 at the time, so I obviously don't remember having this experience. But to think that there are cities and environments and sometimes pure history that will do this to you, just an understanding of where you are that will do this to you emotionally, is so scary, it's so crazy, it's so beautiful in so many ways as well. But to think that that could be happening in India, of course, I can completely see it. We're a land like that as well.
I mean, most people listening to this podcast must have visited a city. I can think of Paris, all these cities that have so much rich literature about them that there is a narrative that you buy into when you get there.
Right.
And so, for example, it's very easy to fall in love in Paris because it's a city of love, and you've bought into that narrative,
Right.
and so you are in an emotional state, making you susceptible to that particular phenomena, and so that's easy for us to buy as a concept that falling in love in Paris is a beautiful thing. We forget that there are cities also like Jerusalem, like certain cities like Varanasi in India, where the spiritual narrative of that city is so overwhelming that if you are ripe for persuasion, if your brain is looking to be convinced, it's very easy to be convinced.
Right. The India syndrome, the Jerusalem syndrome, they're not the only ones either. There's something called the Florence syndrome, which refers to tourists who are physically overwhelmed by the artistic beauty of that Italian city. But India syndrome is distinct in its depth and its danger because India, unlike Jerusalem or Florence, offers travelers an infrastructure for disappearing. Ashrams, caves, remote mountains, and communities of long-term illegal foreign residents who can help you vanish. Justin's case was not the first time India syndrome had been invoked to explain a disappearance. 4 years before Justin vanished, in February 2012, an Irish journalist named Jonathan Spolin disappeared from the holy city of Rishikesh, about 300 kilometers southwest of the Parvati Valley. It was one of our very early cases covered on the audio-only Desi Crime podcast, and that is where we dove deep into a conversation about India syndrome. Spolin was 28 years old, well-travelled and intellectually brilliant. He had studied philosophy and politics at University College Dublin and worked as a journalist at some of the most well-reputed outlets in the world, including the National in Abu Dhabi and the International Herald Tribune in Hong Kong. But then, seeking a different life, he had left his job and his girlfriend and his country and travelled to India, seeking time for reflection, arriving in Rishikesh, the same city where the Beatles had visited Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the same city where sadhus with ash-streaked faces sit along the banks of the Ganga. On February 3, 2012, Spolin spoke to his mother Linda on phone at 3:44 in the morning. He told her he had decided to stay in Rishikesh for a short trek in a forested area rather than travel to smoggy Delhi. He promised to text when he could, and he was never heard from again. The district police chief told the Irish Times that she believed Spolin was alive and had simply chosen to disappear in one of the region's countless ashrams. Even earlier, though, in 2005, a 21-year-old Australian named Ryan Chambers vanished from Rishikesh too. He left behind all his worldly possessions and a handwritten note that is still chilling to read. "If I'm gone, don't worry. I'm not dead. I'm just freeing minds. But first, I have to free my own." That note was treated as definitive proof that Chambers had succumbed to India syndrome, that he had experienced some form of spiritual awakening and voluntarily chosen to leave his life behind.
Aishwarya, this is something Alan Watts has talked about often. Alan Watts, again, this English philosopher, spiritual writer, and he talked about many of his students and the people he has interacted with that take a psychoactive substance, like say mushrooms or ayahuasca, and these are very potent trips. These psychedelic trips, they're spiritually very powerful. What you experience on them, and it's very easy to believe that experience makes you God yourself. There are many people that come out of that experience with the delusion
That they are God.
that they are God, that they are prophets, the Jerusalem syndrome being proof of that. In India, it often happens. And so what you just described of this Australian kid, it is completely symptomatic of somebody going, I am God. I'm the prophet. I'm the Messiah. I shall be the one that frees others' minds.
Right.
And and when you're surrounded by sadhus and you're surrounded by these people that have...
And the drugs.
And the
Again,
drug-
I think India is that, unlike Jerusalem, unlike Florence, India is the coming together of all the right ingredients to make this dangerous. I'm sure all those other cities have the ingredients for a syndrome of this kind. But India, with the drugs, with the sadhus, with the ability to disappear, and then the spiritual angle, is just all of it in one gigantic, really loud country,
And, that's the dangerous side. We're a crime podcast. We're pointing out
Right.
the dangerous side of that.
Right.
Keep in mind, the India syndrome, a syndrome is not in and of itself a negative
Bad
concept.
thing, yeah.
The Beatles produced the White Album in a ashram in Rishikesh only, I think. And all those, that psychedelic experiences, the spiritual experiences lead to beautiful human experiences as well.
100%.
But it requires the right mindset and setting, the people you're surrounded with.
Right.
This case is the perfect example of potent elements combined with the wrong people.
Right.
Whatever happened to that Naga Baba, whoever he was, I'm sure we'll never know the full story.
Yeah.
But he clearly, in my opinion, has played some sort of a role that
Absolutely.
steered shelter in the wrong direction.
Yeah. But despite this explanation of Ryan voluntarily leaving, his family never accepted this explanation, and he remains missing to this day. The phrase India syndrome, for all its clinical origins, has become somewhat of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it names a real phenomena, a disorienting psychological impact that intense spiritual environments can have on vulnerable individuals. On the other hand, it provides a convenient label that can be slapped onto any disappearance in India to avoid asking harder questions. And this is where I have a real problem with how Justin's case was handled. Justin Alexander Shetler was many things. A seeker, yes, and someone deeply drawn to spiritual experiences. But he was also an experienced survivalist with decades of wilderness training. A man with a large social media following he actively maintained. A man with a mother he loved and called regularly. And a man who had a motorcycle parked at the bottom of the mountain that he intended to ride again. The "Don't look for me" line on his blog, the line the police seized upon, was followed by a winking emoji. It was clearly written in the context of telling his followers he'd be off the grid for a few weeks, not a proclamation or declaration that he was leaving the world forever. To use it as evidence that he simply chose to vanish is unconvincing to me, at least. So what happened to Justin Alexander Shetler? After years of investigation by journalists, podcasters, friends, and his family, there are essentially three theories, none of which are satisfying and all of which are haunting. Theory 1 is an accident. Theory 2 is a murder. And Theory 3 is a voluntary disappearance. I've been sitting with this case for a while now, and there are things about it I just cannot shake. I think about how many of the families in these stories, Justin's mother Susie, Jonathan Spolan's mother Linda, Ryan Chambers' father Jock, Ardhavan's mother Homa, Bruno Mushlik's father, all ended up having to do the work of investigators themselves, flying to countries they'd never been to, hiring translators and helicopters, posting on travel forums, begging strangers on the internet for help. These are not people with law enforcement training. These are parents who simply refuse to accept the silence. I think about the valley itself, about how a place named after a goddess of harmony and love has become synonymous with death, and about how the same beauty that draws seekers also isolates them from help, about how the drug trade has turned paradise into a place where a stranger with a bag of hash and a friendly smile might be the last person you ever trust. And I think about Justin, this man who was so alive, who wanted so badly to feel something real that he kept going deeper and deeper into places most of us would never dare to enter. His mother said it best, that her worry was he needed to keep doing more, and at some point, that was going to catch up to him. His friend Tracy Frey, who had known him since his wilderness school days, said his entire life was about looking for something bigger. Even his friend Tom McElroy, who had watched Justin throw himself off cliffs as a teenager, said that when fear told Justin no, Justin would go anyway. There's a line in Justin's blog that I keep returning to. He once wrote that he was running from a life that isn't authentic, running from monotony and towards novelty, towards wonder and awe, and the things that make him feel vibrantly alive. I keep thinking about that word, running, because running towards something and running away from something can look like exactly the same thing from the outside. And maybe that's the truest thing about Justin's story, that none of us really know which direction he was heading when the valley swallowed him. It has now been nearly 10 years since Justin Alexander Shetler vanished. There is no indication he has ever returned to the United States. His case is now officially handled by the Lake Oswego Police Department in Oregon, a department an ocean and a continent away from the mountains where he was last seen. No remains have ever been found. No one has been charged. The sadhu is dead. The porter was released. The police report sits in a folder in a green vault office in Kullu. And somewhere in the Parvati Valley, the river keeps running, cold and jade-colored and violent, named after a goddess, carrying in its currents all the things it has taken and will never give back. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.